Hey, this is Amanda Hammond, and this is the Millennial Rockstar Podcast. Hey, and welcome to this episode of the Millennial Rockstars Podcast. Today's rockstar is J.W. Kaiser, who happens to be the Chief Loan Officer for New People's Bank. And one of the things that I took away from the conversation with J.W. was the importance of hiring right the first time. And JW actually gets into some really interesting things where he talks about how it may cost you a little bit more up front, but it's so worth it in the end. So check out what JW has to say. Hey there, this is Amanda Hammond. I'm known as the Millennial Translator because I help companies attract, retain, and engage top millennial talent. And today on the Millennial Rockstar Podcast, we have JW. JW, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right. So JW, you were actually nominated by someone that I know from my personal life. She and I attended college together. And let me tell you, she has been someone who has always impressed me. So when I reached out to her and asked for a nomination and you were the immediate first person that she was like,
wow,
this is who it is. I was like, all right, I've got to have him on the show. So tell us a little bit about you, JW.
A little bit about me. Well, first I may question that person that nominated me, but it's very flattering and I greatly appreciate that. And, so a little bit about me. Live in Abingdon, Virginia, and got a beautiful wife and a little 10-year-old daughter, and work for a great company called New People's Bank, and I'm a senior commercial loan officer. So I think my exact title is Chief Commercial Banking Officer, but I think in banking they give you these real long titles so they can pay you less, but you know. That's what it's about.
Fantastic. All right. So you and I discussed this a little bit before we turned on the recording, but
Sure.
You are an older millennial, correct?
Thank you for reminding me, but yes.
Oh,
I'm an 80 birth date, I think.
Yes. So you're right at the top end of the age range, which has given you a good bit of work experience, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Okay, fantastic. So tell us a little bit about your career path. How did you get to being that commercial bank officer?
Let's see. Like a lot of kids, I mean, I went to college, and as I was getting ready to leave, I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to be. And I think I wanted to be a pharmaceutical guy at one time. And, I saw my buddy, I had a few friends that did that. And there was nothing like riding around in a car and playing golf all day and selling drugs and making lots of money. But that didn't, those jobs were pretty hard to get then. And so then I thought I'd be a stockbroker, and I realized I didn't want to do that. But kind of how I ended up in banking, a gentleman that I really looked up to that was one of my instructors, a guy by the name of Dr. Steve Bourne. He was an advisor for a local bank, and he asked me if I'd have some interest in going and talking to those guys. And they were trying to hire somebody that was fresh, that didn't have any preconceived notions on banking or any good habits or bad habits, because I didn't have any good habits either since I wasn't a banker. But they wanted somebody that could train and kind of, run around the bank and bring up the way that they wanted to. And so I started there, and from there I worked in Princeton, West Virginia for a little bit, and moved to Whitfield. We had a bank in Whitfield that was struggling, and I was just a young kid at the time, but they kind of gave me a chance. And so I went to Whitfield and had a really good run working at that bank, and was able to have some success at that location. And then, there was another guy in town, which later became my future boss, a guy by the name of Jim Grubbs. And at that time, it was just me and Jim that really loaned money in Whitfield. So, he said, hey, rather than us beat each other up all the time, why don't we just join up? And so again, kind of ended up at another bank, and from there moved to Abington to fix another bank. And when I left there, I moved to another bank to fix it, and ended up here at New People's. So
really what I just heard is that your title should be bank fixer.
Yeah, it actually should be bank janitor, but yeah.
Bank janitor. Fantastic. So in all of that time, I would assume that you have learned some lessons about yourself, about how you work best, and just things that you figured out over the years. So
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about what you have figured out for yourself that works really well for your work style or your work environment, things like that.
Probably the thing that works best for me is to really be open and honest. with everybody you do business with. And that's very generic, but it's very sincere. I heard a phrase one time that was called under promise and overachieve.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's always important to be, whether you're trying to deliver to a new client or get a new relationship, to
Right.
say what you're going to do and do what you say. So,
Mm-hmm.
for me, that's probably the biggest lesson that I've learned, and the one trait that I still hold close to my heart, and just good communication and being able to deliver.
That's awesome. So does that translate not just to the client world, but also internally to fellow bank employees?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, my employees have heard me say, I kind of wear everything on my sleeve, and what you see is what you get. I'm very truthful and very honest, and
That's awesome.
to the point. And, I'll be the first one to pat you on the back and, tell you to go have dinner on the company. And I'll be the first one to kick you in the rear and, give you a coaching lesson. So, but I think that's what people want. I know that that's what I want as an employee, and as a millennial employee. I just want good, clear direction and great goals, and, to be held accountable to those goals, and, have great things said about me when I deliver, and, coaching when I don't. So.
Absolutely. Well, I think that last phrase, the coaching when you don't, I mean, that's one of the things that I work with a lot of companies on, is this idea of radical transparency. And you actually exhibit that. You may not exactly call it that, but you're the first person to admit to, oh, I messed up.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for a boss, for an employee, but also for a boss to show their employees, hey, I mess up too. So it makes them more comfortable that, like, when they mess up, that they can come to you and say, hey, help me fix this.
Yeah, it's way better than trying to cover it up. I mean,
oh yeah,
you don't want to go that route.
and
Not in what we do, especially. So
it's a lot easier to fix before you start messing it up worse.
That's exactly right.
All right. Well, so with all of those wonderful things that you've learned about yourself, I would assume that there's also some things that you've learned that haven't worked so well for you. So any kind of stumbling blocks that you've seen throughout your career, any life lessons, we'll call them, that you've learned over the years?
Since we're talking about age, we'll probably hit that one two ways. When I was, even though I'm a younger millennial, when I was younger in my career, or older millennial, when I was younger in my career, doing what I do, it was hard to get that first shot. I mean, you're trying to loan a guy $1 million or $5 million or whatever it is, and you're a 27-year-old kid that, thought you knew a lot. And, I thought I was a great banker and delivered great service. But, that was probably the first part. It was tough to crack into doing some of those bigger deals with, a little older generation that maybe they had a preconceived notion about the millennials. I'm not sure, but so that was probably my stumbling block one. And, from a life lesson standpoint, the thing that I've learned that's been most true and held true to this day is surround yourself with great people. Take the time to hire the right person, and pay that person what they're worth. I mean, it's at the end of the day, that investment, I see so many people, and I see it even happen in our organization sometimes. It happens everywhere. We look at that other $10,000 that you're going to have to pay in salary, and we go just a little bit lower, and your return is so much better hiring the right person the first time, and hiring a person that has the experience and the qualifications that you want to see in an employee, even if it costs a little more up front.
No, listen, I am a former recruiter.
Oh, okay.
You are preaching to the choir here. I get it. I think that that's so important, is to slow down in that process and actually pay people what they're worth, not just browbeat them on dollars.
Yeah, that's a lesson that I've learned. I mean, when I was younger, I probably fell into that trap some, and would hire, I don't want to say the first person, but the first person that I thought would be right, instead of waiting the person that I knew was right. And the turnover is more, it's more, you got to spend more training.
Yep.
It's not the way we go. And so that's by far the strongest lesson that I've learned. I mean, we have a great team, and I've been able to build a great team at this organization and surround myself with great people. And so.
Okay. That is a wonderful, wonderful lesson that you've learned. And unfortunately, I see companies making that mistake over and over again. And they're like, well, we don't understand why we have high turnover. And I was like,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
So,
If you want greatness, don't hire average.
yes, yes, that is fantastic. Yes, that is perfect. So let me ask you, let's go back to college, JW, for just a second. So
Yeah.
let's think about you getting ready to graduate. And you said that when you were leaving college, you weren't exactly sure what you wanted to do. You had a few things that you were interested in. When you were thinking about you back in the day and the way that you saw corporate America before you experienced it, or the working world or the real world before you actually experienced it, do you remember hitting any major stumbling blocks or reality checks as you moved and transitioned into the real world?
Yeah. Yeah. When you say that, I'm smiling, um, when I went to college, I mean, I did pretty well in college. Made mostly A's, made a B or two here and there. And, when I thought that I graduated, I thought people would just be dying to hire me. I thought that, here's a guy who did great in college and, at least I think I can talk to anybody. And, I thought I would just roll out and like people would have their checkbook and just be dying to drag me over. I'm being a little sarcastic, but that's not really the way it worked. And you kind of gotta earn your way regardless of what it is. It doesn't matter if you're laying bricks for a living or you're in the business world. You gotta earn your way. And so I can remember my first salary, starting out, and I was like, man, I just thought it'd be different. So yeah, that was probably my first stumbling block, was trying to find my way into the real world and what it meant to have a W-2 versus what you thought your W-2 would say.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes. I very much remember getting that very first paycheck and thinking, well, where did all my money go?
Where's the other half at? They took half.
Yeah.
They took half of virtually nothing. But yeah, so that was probably my big stumbling block. I thought that they'd just be lined up out the door and I'd have no problem getting a job and be paying out the wazoo. But
no, yeah,
you gotta earn it.
that's the tough reality a lot of us face leaving college, for sure. So let's talk about you throughout your entire career, because
Sure.
you have mentioned one or two people thus far that have kind of given you an edge throughout the years. But when you're looking back, were there any bosses, current or former, or mentors, or anyone like that that really helped you stay engaged, stay productive, even on those days where you're just like, man, I cannot go back in and face this today?
Sure. If I was to, I've had so many wonderful mentors, just kind of starting there. I mean, even I can remember when I grew up, just a kid, and I played golf every day. That's what I did, and lived in this little small town, and my dad would drop me off at, the crack of sun, daylight, and he'd pick me up at dark. But, there was so many people there that I looked up to, and I played golf with a lot of grown men that kind of took me under their wing and kind of taught me how to be a man and be responsible and be polite. And so, it even goes back that far. And,
Wow.
My dad was a phenomenal father. He was very demanding and, wanted me to do great and be successful in life and be respectful. So even back to the early days, yeah, I have a ton of mentors, and I literally couldn't name them all. Probably my first and best mentor was a guy by the name of Maury Williams.
Okay.
And it's funny enough now, Maury actually works at our bank. When I got out of college, Maury was my first boss.
Really?
And in banking, you have, usually before you go start a new branch, like you see these big, nice $1 million branches. Well, usually before that, you go in and you do what they call a loan production office, which is basically, you send a lender over there and he tries to beat up some loans before you open your branch, because the branch is so expensive. You want some loans to help offset some of those bills. So we were getting ready to build a new branch, and they put Maury and myself and his assistant in this little tiny house over in Princeton, West Virginia. It was this little house office. And our offices were so close that me, just being a young guy straight out of college, I could listen to Maury's conversations, as bad as that was. But by listening to how Maury talked and interacted with people, I really learned how to talk to people. Even when he was in a bad mood that morning, when he picked up that phone, he was smiling. and it was all about them.
Mm-hmm.
So, even though we were in a super tiny office and bathroom was beside everybody's offices, which was a different story, but, it was great to be able to hear those conversations that he had. And he would take me on a lot of joint calls. And so he was my first mentor that really taught me how to interact in business. I knew how to interact with people because I'd had mentors my whole life,
Right.
growing up with people that demanded respect. But he was the first one to be able to convey that to a business
That's
perspective.
awesome. I mean, I wouldn't think of it as like eavesdropping, but I mean, really, that was a wonderful growing and learning experience for
It
you
was.
to have, especially at that critical juncture of your career.
Yeah. And now Maury works with us. We parted ways years ago, and he went to a different bank and I went to a different bank, and he joined our commercial team about 3 or 4 months ago. So it's
Really?
amazing.
Oh, that's just a wonderful
It's
circle.
amazing how people come back. Yeah.
That is fantastic. Have you ever shared with them about kind of the impact that listening in on those conversations has had on you in your
Yeah,
career?
probably some. I probably never divulged, that I was eavesdropping on every conversation he ever had. But I assume if he was going to talk to his wife, he'd shut the door. But just a small office. But
Well, I mean, you'll have to forward him a copy of
there
this
we go.
podcast.
There
So,
we go.
Okay. So is there anything at any of the banks or any of the organizations you've worked with or been a part of that they gave as far as perks or benefits, or even just the culture within those organizations that has really made you say, man, these are my people. This is where I want to be. This is where I need to be.
Yeah. I've been very, very fortunate. I worked at about 3 organizations, and they've all really believed in education,
Mm-hmm.
and they believed in investing in people.
Okay.
And, for me, I've always wanted to continue to grow, and I read a lot, and, I went back to school and got my MBA and all that stuff. And in banking, there's so much to learn, and you learn every day. And I'm sure it's like that in every field. It's just, this is the one that I know. So I've always had great employers that were willing to invest in me.
That's
And
awesome.
I wouldn't work somewhere that wasn't willing to invest in me. Um, you know, I, there's I saw a post on Facebook one time that said, what happens if we invest in this employee and they leave?
Yep.
Well, what happens if you don't invest in them and they stay?
Yeah.
It's worse. So, I've always had great employers that, believed in education and training people right and doing things the right way. And I've been very fortunate there. Perks. I've never had a boss that micromanaged me. And yeah, I know it's hard to believe. It is
I
hard to
can't
believe.
believe that.
Um, back to probably my first real, I mean, not my real job, but my first real challenge was,
Mhm.
when I was at First Bank, and I went to run a new branch, or an old branch that was losing a bunch of money. I had a boss by the name of Jim Grubbs, and, Jim kind of sent me down there, and he said, "Hey, I don't care how you do it. I just want you to make money." And it was losing a bunch of money, and he didn't call me every week wanting to know what my 7-step plan was. And, he wanted to look at the numbers. And
That's
so
awesome.
for me, that's very important. And even my current bank president, he's the same way. He don't care if I work 60 hours or 40 hours, or if I leave here at 3 o'clock and go play golf. It's, did you do your job?
Mm-hmm.
Did you deliver on the results that we agreed that you deliver on? And if
Right.
and I think that's what millennials want. I mean, I know that's what I want. I don't want to be micromanaged. I've had times in my career where I've worked 80 hours a week, and I don't want to do it. I mean, I want to have a healthy work-life balance. And at the end of the day, I'll do what it takes to deliver.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that is 80 hours,
Right.
but sometimes it's 30.
Yeah. JW, that was very millennial of you to say that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
That work-life balance idea. That's something that I hear a lot of complaining about is like, older generations sometimes just don't get that. But of course, boomers were the ones that introduced the concept of being a workaholic.
Yeah.
So I guess that's probably why. So when you're looking at hiring a young employee, Is there anything in your mind that will stand out, whether it's in a resume, whether it's in the interview process? Is there anything that really stands out in your mind that says this person is going to be a rock star? This person, like, I got to have this person.
I want somebody that's confident. I mean,
Okay.
first and foremost, I tell everyone the same thing, that I hire you for this, what we're doing right here. I mean, I hire you if you can communicate. That's kind of the part one of what we do. If you can have great conversation with great people and ask for business, you'll be very successful. But the second part of that is I want somebody that's driven, and I want somebody that's not driven by dollars. Dollars are the worst motivator ever. I mean, if you give somebody some dollars, it's very short-term, performance-driven. It's not what people think it is. So I want someone that first and foremost can communicate, and then second, the success that they want to have comes from within, not an external reward.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that a lot. So, is there anything else that you think that organizations need to know about hiring millennials, whether they're the younger millennials or the older millennials like yourself?
Yeah. Thanks for reminding me again. But
You're so welcome.
I do think millennials are a little different generation, and it's no different than what I do or what you do. I mean, if you go to one organization or another one, you've got to kind of tailor your pitch a little. And it's the same if I'm going to see a farmer, or if I'm going to see a $30 million customer. It's you got to change a little bit, and you got to have some flexibility. And I think millennials probably demand that more than ever. I mean, I don't think that they're, I'm not saying previous generations was cookie cutter. I'm not saying that, but I think they want some flexibility.
Yep.
I think the perks that they want are a little different. So to me, when I try to hire someone that's younger, I want to figure out what their hot button is.
Yes.
What do they want the most out of this? Is it, do they value the vacation? Do they value the dollars? Do they value, a country club membership? What is it?
And how do you find that out, JW?
You got to ask great questions. It's no different than if you'll talk to someone and you get somebody talking about themselves, they'll love to keep going. So it's you ask great questions, and don't be afraid to ask those questions. So I think you figure out what the hot button is, and you play that card, because ultimately that's what's going to drive their decision and make them happy and content with where they're going to work.
That's awesome. That is fantastic advice, and I think that's something every leader needs to hear. I mean,
Sure.
Because at the end of the day, we're all hiring, we're all looking for that next person that's going to help us push to the next level. But you got to hire right to do that.
That's right.
So, all right. Well, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, JW, for being on the Millennial Rockstar podcast. Is it okay if our audience wants to reach out to you on LinkedIn?
Sure, that'd be great.
Fantastic. Well, I will share a link to JW's LinkedIn profile in the show notes. But thank you guys for joining us today on the Millennial Rockstar podcast, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of the Millennial Rockstar Podcast. If you are looking for even more information on millennials and some free resources, visit my website at amandahammett.com. The link is below. It's amandahammett.com. There you can download a free millennial employee engagement guide that will give you all kinds of tips and tricks on how to keep those millennials engaged on a day-to-day basis. Because we all know that millennials who are happy at work are more productive at work.